This week, we're re-examining our Special Catalyst investigative project that takes a critical look at the history of mass violence in Texas. We started the project in 2019 after deadly shootings in El Paso and Midland, Odessa. We examined mass shootings in Texas dating back to 1980. Since then, state leaders have taken some steps to prevent tragedies, but we wanted to take a closer look at where we stand today. Investigator Arzo Dost joined me for an in-depth conversation going inside the investigation. We want to share part of that conversation where we focus on a solutions journalism project called Stop Mass Shootings.
Well, the fact that we continue to have these shootings, the conversations we're continuing to have, and the questions we're continuing to be asked, how can this continue to keep happening, right? And so as part of that, we wanted, as you mentioned, Governor Abbott was really key on alertness and also training. And so as part of that, we were able to really focus on a group that is focused on training for law enforcement. Alert, out of Texas State, known for advanced law enforcement rapid response training. What this group does, travels the country really to go train law enforcement. Today, more than 300,000 first responders have had this training, but it doesn't really stop there because the focus needs to be also on civilian communities, right? And given what we've seen with school shootings, there's now a big focus. And Alert, just speaking with them recently, tells me they are busier than ever because the demand has grown so much for not only for them to provide training for schools, hospitals, churches, but also the different departments that are starting to see some of these things play out in their own communities, whether big or small. So the focus is not only what do you do when a shooting happens like this, what do you do in that moment? But what do you do in the seconds after until first responders arrive? There are things like CPR, ways to prevent blood loss that you can do immediately to save lives. So this is really not just for first responders, but civilians, which is something that has been a key focus in the last several years.
And when we produced these stories for the Stop Mass Shootings project, we ended up sending those links to lawmakers who were involved in this conversation because we wanted them to be aware of some of the solutions we were exploring as they were considering what policies and legislation they could craft in a future session. So what ended up happening at that point was that the House and Senate both formed special committees to examine mass violence, much like what the Governor's Commission had done. And their intent was to hold hearings around the state. They went to El Paso, they went to Odessa, the places where the mass shootings had happened, talked to the people that had been impacted directly to kind of find out what, pieces of the conversation they had missed or that they wanted to make sure that they understood specifically before they started creating these bills for potential laws in the future. Unfortunately, what happened right around that time when we were going into the next legislative session were two major things in Texas and the United States as well. The coronavirus pandemic happened, and then we also had a major winter storm that knocked out the state's power grid. So, of course, with the COVID-19, there was no travel really, and so that kind of shut down a little bit of the conversations. And then when the state's power grid failed, of course, that kind of took over the agenda at the Capitol during that legislative session. So some of the legislation that they did want to propose did end up passing. Namely, there was one that required active shooter alerts to come out. If there was an active shooter, you would get an alert within 50 miles of that active shooting. But unfortunately, a lot of the things that they had intended to propose ended up not passing. That kind of brings us to what happened in 2022, though, because this is a problem, as I mentioned, that wasn't going away. We had Uvalde that happened. There was a shooter that came into the elementary school in Uvalde and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. One classroom, 19 children. And there was a lot of anger about that, a lot of things still playing out. But how is that one really impacting what we're doing in your mind?
Well, it takes you back to what you mentioned, going back to 1980 and talking to the families that were so gracious to relive those horrific moments with us. What they wanted, what they asked for is still playing out today. So it's hard not to ask, well, why haven't we done anything? Why have we really not focused on this? As you mentioned, as part of the Catalyst Project, we did a timeline where we heavily researched, looking at archives, newspapers, talking to victims, families involved. We did a timeline of 32 events where the focus was on incidents that involved more than 3 victims, not the shooter, and what happened in those situations, not only to the victims, survivors, but also law-wise. And we've covered everything from the shootings in Luby's, Killeen, where the Fort Hood was impacted, to Dallas, where police officers were targeted. Near us, you mentioned Uvalde, but also Sutherland Springs. I was one of the first reporters on scene to cover that shooting, and I will never forget the cries of family members as they were waiting to hear back if their loved one was inside that church during the Sutherland Springs shooting. So, we've come a long way as far as discussions go, and we even launched a roundtable discussion that was more than an hour long at UT that focused on gun policy and mental health and key questions that were being asked. And it's fair to say that today the frustrations are still there. What is being done? Why have we not really focused on gun policy like we should?
There is much more to our coverage. We posted our full conversation as well as our original reporting on the History of Mass Violence Project. Just look for the links in this week's State of Texas story. When police are called to investigate, they often bring in a drone to fly above and get information. So what are they capturing in the sky? A new state law could help get answers. We look at the new rules and a greater push for transparency.